Have you ever spent your entire life raising a child with all your love, your sacrifices, even forsaking your own dreams only to be met one day when your hair has turned gray with nothing but silence? No phone calls, no questions of concern, not even a glance that acknowledges you ever existed in their life. And in those solitary moments, you ask yourself, what did I do wrong? As a parent, do I deserve to be forgotten like this? But if we look through the eyes of a Stoic one, who understands that nothing is eternal, that anything beyond our control cannot define our worth, then perhaps that pain is not a sentence, but a disguised gift. A gift that denies, yet opens a door to inner freedom, the very thing most of us lost along the journey of being a parent. 1. Pain does not arise from actions, but from unchecked expectations. When a father or mother is ignored, rejected, or treated coldly by their children in old age, the first feeling that often surfaces is hurt. It is a quiet, lingering pain, difficult to put into words. After all the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the tears swallowed behind smiles, the meals given up for their child, now, not even a single phone call arrives. What pierces the heart is not merely the action itself, but the recurring thought. They shouldn't have done that. They should have known better. They should have loved me more. It is these should-haves that form the root of suffering. The actions of others may shape our circumstances, but our response, the pain, the anger, the despair often stems from our own unmanaged expectations. We expect our children to repay us with gratitude. We hope that the love we gave will return as care, respect, or at the very least a warm presence in our lives. But life does not operate by such precise equations. Stoic philosophy, especially through the teachings of Epictetus, emphasizes that pain does not originate from what happens to us, but from how we interpret what happens. When a child becomes distant, that event is simply a part of reality, like the rain falling or the wind blowing. But if we attach meanings such as, I am a failure, I am unlovable, my child is ungrateful, then we add another layer of emotion, deepening the wound. That emotion does not come from the child, but from our own thoughts. Stoicism does not teach us to become numb. It does not ask us to ignore sadness, but it helps us distinguish between what is within our control and what is not. Our child's behavior we cannot change, but our expectations we can absolutely adjust. When we await responses, care, or filial piety that never arrives, it is that very expectation that becomes the noose tightening around our inner peace. The more we cling to it, the more suffocated we become in disappointment. One of the common mistakes we make as parents is confusing love with reciprocation. We love our children and therefore expect them to love us back. But love, if it is truly love, is not a transaction. It should not be governed by a principle of give and receive like a commodity in the marketplace. Stoic philosophy teaches, if you choose to love, then love with the understanding that it is your decision, not a contract demanding a response. The story of James, the father who held deep expectations for his son's gratitude, is a clear illustration. He sacrificed years of his career, set aside personal dreams, and worked tirelessly to send his son to college. But as the son grew up and built his own family, the communication faded and then nearly vanished. James fell into depression, repeatedly asking himself, what did I do wrong for my son to turn away from me? But when introduced to Stoic thought, He gradually realized that his greatest pain did not come from his son's absence, but from the deep-rooted belief that such a thing should never happen. We often assume expectations are natural, that parents have the right to expect love in return. But Stoicism poses a different question. Does that serve your peace? If expectation brings suffering, can we learn to let it go? Not by extinguishing our feelings, but by liberating them from attachment. Imagine a river. It flows through mountains, plains, even arid lands. It does not wait for the earth to smile back at it, nor expect thanks from the grassy banks. It simply flows, because that is its nature. So is love. When love no longer demands a response, it becomes the purest form of energy, untouched by expectation and unharmed by silence. Letting go of expectation does not mean giving up hope for a good relationship. It simply means releasing ourselves from dependence on the outcome. It allows us to shift from dependence to agency. We no longer ask, why did they do this? But instead, what can I do to preserve peace within myself? That question centers our focus on the only place where our power truly resides within. The practice of letting go is not a one-time act. It is a continual process. Some days, emotions will surge, especially on holidays, birthdays, or when others boast that their children call and visit regularly. But each of these moments is a reminder. I choose not to let what is beyond my control steal my peace. The Stoic does not deny reality, they face it with courage. They do not suppress sorrow, they observe it without being swept away. And most importantly, they understand that expectation is not a condition for love. We can still love peacefully, even when that love is not returned. Because in the end, true freedom does not come from being loved by another, but from not being ruled by that love. 2. Letting go does not mean surrender. In modern culture, the concept of letting go is often misunderstood. Many associate it with helplessness, resignation, or even failure. But in Stoic philosophy, letting go bears no resemblance to surrender. It is neither the rejection of emotion nor the avoidance of reality. On the contrary, letting go is a deliberate, powerful, and conscious act, one born from deep understanding of the boundary between what we can control and what we cannot. When parents are met with coldness from their own children, their first instinct is often to hold on, to explain, even to beg for affection. They reach back into the past for justification. I did everything for you. I never stopped loving you. But after repeated silence, they often find themselves torn between the pain of rejection and the helplessness of being unable to change anything. It is at this crossroads that the path of letting go emerges. Yet we must understand that letting go, in the Stoic spirit, is not severing ties, nor turning away in bitterness. It does not mean I disown you, or I no longer care. It means this: I accept that I cannot command another's heart, and therefore, I will no longer allow it to govern my inner life. Epictetus once said, freedom is not achieved by satisfying desire, but by eliminating it. Letting go is a living embodiment of that idea. It is the process of walking alongside reality, not waging war against it. When a father stops trying to change his child's thinking, it is not because he has ceased to care, but because he has come to see that expecting change from others is a drain on one's inner strength, a battle with no victory. Picture a small boat on the open sea. If the sailor tries to control the wind, he will exhaust himself to no avail. But if he focuses on adjusting the sail, steadying the rudder, and reading the current, then though he cannot shift the wind, he can still travel far. Letting go in Stoicism is just that, not attempting to change the wind, others' behavior, but mastering the sail, one's own response. When estranged from one's children, letting go does not mean denying the pain. The pain is real. The longing is real. The unanswered questions are real. But what the Stoic seeks is not the erasure of a feeling, but the capacity to live with those feelings without allowing them to overrun reason and integrity. We may feel sorrow, but not despair. We may miss them, but we do not tie our existence to their presence. The practice of letting go in Stoicism also involves a crucial insight, discerning what is ours to carry. When a mother feels wounded because her child no longer calls, it does not mean she should stop loving, but that love must be transformed from dependency on response to an autonomous act, loving because she chooses to love, not because she expects it to be returned. The Stoic does not seek to change others. They change how they see, and that shift unlocks a space of inner freedom. When we are no longer ruled by expectation, we begin to live as sovereign beings. Letting go, then, not an escape from suffering. It is the only way to prevent suffering from dictating who we are. One vivid example is the story of Robert, a father who called his son every week for 2 years, receiving only silence in return. At first he felt anger, then came despair. But after embracing Stoic teachings, he chose to stop making those unanswered calls, not out of resentment, but from the realization that he was chasing an illusion. Instead, he wrote letters to his son, never sent as a way to process his feelings, and redirected his energy toward what he could control: exercising, learning a new language, connecting with his senior community. This act of letting go did not diminish his love, but transformed it into a force for strength. Stoicism does not ask us to suppress emotion. It simply places emotion in its proper place within a framework of moral clarity. Letting go in that light becomes a way to remain steady amid storms, like witnessing a coming storm and choosing to take shelter in the house of reason, rather than standing in the rain, screaming for it to stop. Most importantly, letting go is not loss. Many fear that if they stop clinging, they will lose the relationship altogether. But in truth, only when we stop trying to control do we open the door to genuine connection, if such connection is even possible. The Stoic silence is not a wall, but a door, one that others may walk through when they are ready. No pressure, no haste. And if no one ever walks through, we remain intact in dignity and peace. Letting go, therefore, is not an ending. It is a reordering of the soul. It is a quiet declaration: I do not need to change others in order to live well. I may ache, I may remember, but I can also choose serenity. And in that choice, I am not surrendering. I am simply walking away from a war I never needed to fight. 3. Unconditional love is a sign of strength, not weakness. Love is one of the most powerful emotions known to humanity. It can lift a broken spirit, soothe the deepest wounds, and forge bonds that withstand the passing of time. Yet when love is not returned, especially by one's own child to whom one has given their heart and life, that emotion can easily become distorted into disappointment, hurt, even anger. It is at the intersection of love and pain that people begin to wonder, am I wrong for loving unconditionally? Is this a form of weakness? Stoic philosophy offers a contrary view. Unconditional love, a love that does not hinge on reciprocation, is not a mark of naivety or lack of awareness. It is the highest form of emotional and intellectual maturity. For only when a person has come to a deep understanding of the limits of control can they continue to love without becoming entangled in expectation or disappointment. In the relationship between parent and child, unconditional love is often assumed to be a given, that parents ought to love without condition. But in reality, not everyone can maintain that love when the relationship fractures. When children no longer care, no longer call, no longer show concern, or worse, grow cold, parental love faces its greatest test. It is stretched between the instinct to be loved in return and the wisdom learning to let go. Unconditional love does not mean tolerating every wrongdoing, nor does it imply blindly enduring pain. The heart of it lies in this: the one who loves no longer ties the worth of their love to the other's response. They love because it is right within them, not because they hope for something in return. They do not love to be remembered, thanked, or tended to. They love because love has become a virtue, not a transaction. Epictetus emphasized that we can only control our thoughts, our actions, and our moral character. If loving is a moral act, a conscious decision born of compassion, then it requires no condition to exist. And in that light, to maintain love even in emotional scarcity is to exercise the soul's greatest power, the freedom to love. The story of Elora, a mother who once shared her journey in transforming her love for her daughter, is a vivid example. For years, she lived in hope that one day her daughter would return, would call, would send even a single message. When that did not happen, she fell into long sorrow. But then, instead of letting that love turn into resentment, she looked inward. Why do I love my daughter? If the answer is because she is my daughter, then that love must exist independently of her presence. From that moment, she stopped demanding, stopped waiting. She kept the love quietly in her heart, like a candle lighting her inner world, needing no witness, needing no gratitude. In a world where emotions are often conflated with reactions, that we are happy when others are kind, and we hurt when others are cold, preserving love regardless of circumstance is an extraordinary act. It demands inner strength, resolve, and a level of self-mastery few attain. The Stoic does not love to possess, but loves to practice virtue. And it is virtue, not outcome, that is the true reward. Unconditional love also means freeing the other from the burden of expectation. When we love someone with the hope that they behave a certain way to prove their affection, we unknowingly turn them into tools for our emotional security. But when we release that, love becomes a gift of freedom. It does not weigh the other down. And if they return, it is their choice, not a duty. If they do not, the love still remains whole, untainted by disappointment. Stoicism does not discard emotion. It helps us place emotion within our moral architecture. When love no longer rests upon the external, but becomes part of our being, like courage, humility, or integrity, it is no longer easily wounded. It becomes firm like an old tree. The sun and rain are no threat. Strong winds only test its roots. Unconditional love, then, is not weakness. It is the affirmation that we do not need to be loved in order to love. We do not need anyone to validate the worth of our affection. And if someone rejects it, that does not make the love meaningless. It simply proves that the love was never something externally governed, but an inward choice. The strength of one who loves unconditionally comes from not tying their identity to another's reaction. They do not let coldness make them bitter. They do not let rejection close their hearts. They love like a stream, natural, persistent, and uninvited. And precisely because they love without demand, they preserve their dignity in the face of rejection. No one can make them lesser, because their love was never dependent on the other's command. That strength is quiet, unassuming, but it is one of the clearest expressions of the self-mastery that Stoicism strives for. 4. The ego, the most dangerous hidden enemy. In every relationship, especially between parent and child, there exists a force that quietly shapes emotions, determines reactions, and is often the hidden source of deep wounds. The ego. It is neither as visible as silence nor as loud as rejection, yet it exerts the most powerful influence on how we perceive and respond to pain. The ego, or self-image, is the part of the mind that craves recognition, respect, being seen as right, good, and worthy. As parents, we do not only give love, we also subconsciously construct an identity. The self-sacrificing one, the nurturer, the one who deserves gratitude. And from that identity arises a silent expectation. Because I have done all this, I deserve something in return. When that is met with a child turning away, the ego does not simply feel hurt. It becomes enraged. It resists and begins to cultivate thoughts like, "My child is ungrateful. I don't deserve this. I am the victim." Stoic philosophy does not deny the pain that comes from broken bonds, but it shifts attention to what is often overlooked. Our reaction to the event is more controlled by the ego than we realize. When someone feels, "I am no longer valued, I have no place in my child's life," the real suffering often lies not in the objective reality, but in the ego being challenged and left unfed. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, once wrote in the Meditations, "Remove the thought, I am hurt, and the hurt itself is gone." This is not a denial of reality or emotion, but a reminder that pain is often amplified by thoughts tethered to the ego. If one can see events simply as they are, the actions of another, not a judgment of one's worth, then the emotional sting loses much of its power. The ego operates in subtle ways. It causes pain not only from a child's silence, but from the thought, "What will others think of me now? Will they see me as a failed parent?" The ego not only wants to be loved by the child, but also validated by society. When that validation doesn't come, the ego refuses reality. It resists, flails, and in doing so, drags the mind into a pit of self-pity and anger. Stoicism teaches that freedom from the ego is one of the most difficult, yet most essential, paths to peace. Only when the ego recedes can a person observe clearly, calmly, and with integrity. When no longer obsessed with the question, "Who am I in the eyes of others?" they can ask a more vital one. "How am I responding, and does that reflect my values?" In a real situation, when a mother hears her daughter say, "I don't want you in my life anymore," the ego reacts almost instantly. How dare she say that? I am her mother. I deserve respect. But if that mother applies Stoic thinking, she will pause and ask, "This is beyond my control. I cannot change her mind or emotions, but I can choose to uphold my dignity and respond in line with my values." She may still grieve, but she will not let the ego dictate her actions. She will not retaliate. She will not seek control or persuasion. She will remain composed, and in that lies true strength. The ego always wants answers. It despises uncertainty. When rejected, it repeats the question, "Why?" But the truth is, in many cases, there is no satisfying answer. Others' motives are complex, shaped by wounds, experiences, and limitations we cannot fully know. The more we chase an explanation to soothe the ego, the deeper we wander into what lies beyond our control. Stoicism offers a simpler solution. If you cannot know everything, accept that you don't need to know everything in order to live with integrity. Liberating oneself from the ego does not mean becoming invisible or diminishing oneself. It simply means shifting the center of one's life back inward, instead of letting it revolve around others' approval. The Stoic still has honor, still has boundaries, but these are not defined by how others treat them. Self-respect is not held hostage by external eyes. Recognizing and overcoming the ego is a process. Every moment we feel insulted, forgotten, or dismissed is an opportunity to look inward and ask, who feels threatened, my true self or my ego? And if the answer is the ego, then even a single breath, a moment of stillness, can shift the course. The ego is a hidden enemy because it often disguises itself in the names of love, duty, and peace. But the Stoic practitioner is not one to deceive themselves. They train in inner honesty and through it, slowly dismantle the masks the ego wears. This is not the abandonment of self-worth, but the return to true worth, untethered from the need for praise, grounded in the stillness of one's own being. 5. The judgment of others does not define us. When a father or mother is estranged from their own child, what wounds them is not only the child's silence, but also the gaze of others. The whispers, the indirect questions, even the pity or judgment from those around them. All of it deepens the personal pain. Beneath it lies a quiet yet deeply rooted fear. The fear that others might think they've failed as a parent. Social judgment is always present, especially in relationships bound by moral expectation, like family. A father whom the children no longer visit is easily labeled negligent. A mother rejected by her child is assumed to have done harm. Though such assessments lack full understanding, they carry weight because people often derive their self-worth through the eyes of others. Stoic philosophy clarifies this by separating true value from external perception. Epictetus once said, "When someone insults you or speaks ill of you, remember, they do not know the full story." His words underscore a core truth. Inner reality does not change based on how others see it. What people witness is only the surface of fragment of the whole life of a person. They cannot see the inner struggle, the quiet sacrifices, or the efforts made in silence. Stoicism centers itself on what we can control, and the thoughts of others are not among them. We cannot govern their perceptions, prejudices, or emotions. Trying to please everyone only leads to exhaustion and self-loss. Letting others define your worth is like handing the keys to your home to a stranger, allowing them to enter and disrupt your inner world at will. Those who live in the Stoic spirit learn to stand firm in the face of judgment, not because they are indifferent, but because they choose to place value in what endures: character, reason, and inner peace. When criticized, they do not react impulsively but ask, "Is there any truth in what was said? If so, I will in peace. If not, it does not concern me." In the specific case of parents being rejected by their children, the gossip around them can be more brutal than the child's actions. Phrases like, "There must be a reason," or "No child turns their back for nothing," or "If even their own child left, something must be wrong with them," place an invisible burden on the parent's shoulders. But that burden only exists if those words are allowed to penetrate the deepest layer of the self, the very place where self-worth should be most protected. In Stoic thought, ataraxia tranquility is the supreme state of mind, undisturbed by external forces, including praise or blame. The one who reaches that state is not withdrawn from society, but simply does not allow society to define them. They feel no need to prove they're right, nor to justify what others don't understand. A vivid example is the story of Matteo, a single father who raised his daughter alone for 10 years after his wife passed away. Despite his efforts, his daughter distanced herself in adulthood, accusing him of being overly controlling. When neighbors began to gossip, Matteo felt the world turning its back on him. But instead of pushing back, he stepped back and asked himself, "Did I live in accordance with my values? Did I act from love and responsibility?" When the answer was yes, he chose silence, no defenses, no explanations. And in that silence, he found peace not from others, but from his own honesty. Judgment from others is inevitable. In any community, whether as small as a family or as vast as society, people live under scrutiny. But the Stoic practitioner understands that what truly matters is not what others think, but how one lives. They invest their energy in cultivating virtue, not in curating an image. What's remarkable is that once someone stops reacting strongly to judgment, they begin to grow naturally firm. That firmness does not come from numbness, but from grounding one's worth in an unshakable place, in deliberate action, clear thinking, and the decision to live independently of external approval. Stoicism does not encourage disconnection from others, but it does emphasize that inner peace should not be traded for social validation. When a parent is misunderstood, what they need is not public defense, but the quiet knowledge that they have lived with integrity. Only then can they pass through the glare of judgment without losing their center. True freedom is not living unwished, but knowing how not to be ruled by judgment. And once the Stoic reaches that freedom, they are no longer wounded by what others think. They can continue to love even when misunderstood. They can continue to live honorably even when unrecognized. And in that lies the resilience of character that Stoic philosophy calls us to embody. 6. Transmuting love from pain to purposeful action. Love, when rejected, often leaves a hollow void in the soul, especially the love of a parent for their child, a love that is unconditional, immeasurable, and free of demands. When that love is not received, the parent loses not only a bond, but also a piece of the meaning that once gave shape to their life. This absence is not only emotional, it disrupts behavior and purpose. A person who once lived for caregiving, sacrifice, and quietly witnessing their child's growth is suddenly pushed aside and often falls into a state of emptiness and disorientation. The question that arises is not only, why did my child do this, but what am I when I am no longer significant in their life? Stoic philosophy does not deny this pain. It redirects it toward an alternative path, the transmutation of love, from pain into purposeful action. For love does not vanish simply because it is unreturned. It only loses its way when it is misplaced. And if not redirected, that energy can easily sour into bitterness, resentment, or self-pity. Transmutation does not mean replacement. No one can replace the role of a child in a parent's heart. But love, as a spiritual force, can be redirected, like a river altering its course when blocked, without drudging up. In practice, many parents who have experienced rejection from their children have rediscovered vitality and inner peace through new forms of meaningful engagement. Some turn to volunteer work, caring for orphans, supporting isolated elders, or simply returning to long-neglected passions. Gardening, painting, reading, playing music. These acts are not meant to fill a void, but to represent a deliberate choice to use the same love that was once rejected as nourishment for something else to grow within. This is a rebirth, not by forgetting the pain, but by turning that pain into soil for new values to take root. Helen's story is a clear example. After years without hearing from her son, the one who once promised, "I'll never leave you," she fell into depression. But rather than let loneliness consume her, she began caring for abandoned animals at a nearby shelter. The love she held for her son did not disappear. It simply transformed. She tended to each dog and cat with a gentleness and patience that seemed to revive the care she once had nowhere to give. Over time, she felt lighter. She did not forget her son, but she no longer allowed the pain to dominate her life. In Stoicism, the question is not how to avoid pain, but what to do with it. When love is turned into meaningful action, the person does not deny emotion. They integrate it into their moral path. No longer led by emotion into darkness, they use it as fuel for a life of depth. Stoicism also emphasizes that the essence of human nature is rational action and service to others. When someone collapses inward from rejection, they lose this essential function. But when they re-engage with the world, even in a small, contributive way, they restore their humanity. This is an act of agency, not for recognition, but as a declaration. I still have the capacity to love. I still hold value. No love is ever wasted. Even unreciprocated, it contains energy. The question is, will we let that energy rot in regret? Or will we use it to nurture something else that needs it? The Stoic chooses the latter. They don't ask, "Why did this happen to me?" but "What can I do with this to live in accordance with my character?" Transmuting love is not merely external action. It is internal healing. When love is no longer imprisoned by expectation or pain, it becomes clearer, more resilient. It becomes part of one's character, no longer bound to any one recipient, but flowing as a vital current throughout life. And perhaps in such action, in a place with no demand, no attachment, we rediscover a deeper part of ourselves, the part not defined by who loves us, but by how we choose to keep loving, regardless of what has been lost. 7. Redefining one's value and role. One of the deepest wounds a person can experience is the feeling of having a role stripped away, one that once defined their very existence. For parents, being estranged from their children is not just a rupture in emotional connection, but an identity crisis. When the role of nurturer, protector, or simply someone important in their child's life no longer exists, the parent is forced to face a profound question. Who am I when I am no longer needed? In Stoic philosophy, a person is not defined by social roles or relationships, but by virtue and the choices they make. This opens a new path for those who are grappling with the loss of their place in another's life. Rather than shattering with the fading image, the Stoic learns to redefine themselves, not through others, but through what they consciously cultivate within. When a role collapses, the first thing to recognize is the over-identification with a title. Being a father or mother, for years, guides behavior, thought, and emotion. But that role, however noble, is just a part, not the whole, of one's identity. When the role no longer fits, or is no longer maintained by others, personal value should not vanish with it. This is the moment the Stoic pauses and asks, am I still a rational, moral being, capable of right action? If the answer is yes, then the self remains intact, only in need of adjustment for a new phase of life. Redefining one's value requires a shift from social roles to inner qualities. No longer called the ever-present father or the trusted mother, one can still be someone who lives with sincerity, calm, and love without attachment. One may no longer be the first person their child calls in times of need, but still be someone who listens to life with a heart freed from expectation. This process of redefinition also offers a chance to look inward with greater clarity. Often, in living for others, we forget we once had passions, dreams, and personal interests unrelated to parenthood. The absence of children can be painful, but it also creates the necessary space to return to a more original self, a self that existed before the role of parent was ever assumed. To redefine the self is not to fabricate a new identity, but to shed layers of selfhood shaped by dependence on others and return to the core. I am a rational, moral being, capable of shaping meaning from my own life. From this foundation, the Stoic begins to rebuild their relationship with the self, something many have long neglected in the journey of caring for others. A real example is the case of Eduardo, a man who had been the emotional anchor of his family for 30 years. When his children grew up and stopped keeping regular contact, he felt hollow. But instead of drifting endlessly, he revisited the things that once brought him joy before marriage: writing, gardening, and reading philosophy. No longer the needed father, he became a writer admired in his community, a spiritual companion to others who felt forgotten. His social role changed, but his inner worth did not. One of Stoicism's core tenets is the impermanence of all things outside our control: fame, wealth, health, and relationships. If a person roots their entire identity in what time can alter, they will always live anxiously and remain fragile. Conversely, if they anchor themselves in what cannot be taken away, virtue, autonomy, kindness, then no matter how the world shifts, they remain steady. Redefining one's role does not mean denying the past. A person who was once a devoted parent can honor that truth with gratitude. But the past should not become a chain binding them to outdated expectations. When the old role is no longer valid, it is not a loss of dignity, but a signal to transition into the next chapter of personal growth. In Stoic thought, every person is a fragment of universal reason, logos, tasked with living true to their nature, regardless of circumstance. Thus, self-worth should not hinge on others' recognition, but on whether one lives with reason, virtue, and compassion. Ultimately, when one learns to redefine the self, they become freer in their relationships with others. They no longer approach connections from a need to confirm their role, but from a capacity to give without dependence. Their presence becomes lighter, not a demand, but an ethical choice. 8. Reestablishing purpose in the twilight years. When a person enters old age, especially after the rupture of being rejected by their own children, the question of life's purpose becomes more urgent than ever. For many years, life had been shaped around roles: as parent, as supporter, as self-sacrificer. But as those roles gradually fade with time, or are denied by those closest to them, one can easily drift into a sense of disorientation. From there, emptiness and meaninglessness may quietly erode each passing day. Stoic philosophy does not promise to erase those feelings, but it offers a different approach. Life's purpose is not bound to age or others' recognition, but resides in the human capacity to generate value from the present moment. Stoicism sees life as a series of present moments, not tethered to a vanished past, nor dependent on a future we cannot control. Therefore, as long as the present remains, so does the full possibility of a purposeful life. At any age, a person can actively redefine their meaning through what they still control: thoughts, actions, and virtue. In reality, later life often brings physical slowing, but also opens space for reflection and contemplation. No longer caught in the current of duty, responsibility, and societal or familial expectations, a person has the opportunity to look inward, to ask what truly matters to them. This stage, according to Stoicism, is one where one can live closer to reason than ever before, having weathered enough loss, change, and silence to recognize what is truly of value. Redefining purpose need not be grand. It may involve maintaining a disciplined routine, recording memories, sharing experience with younger generations, tending a small garden, learning something new, or simply practicing compassion toward oneself and others. In Stoicism, every action, no matter how small, if born of autonomy and virtue, holds intrinsic worth and adds meaning to life. What matters in establishing new purpose is not letting the silence of others become a verdict against one's value. When children no longer call, when society no longer expects anything, the elderly may be tempted to think, "I have no all left." But in Stoicism, worth does not depend on being needed. It depends on whether we live with virtue. The story of Lynn, a woman who raised 2 sons alone, is a clear illustration. When both sons married and slowly grew distant, she fell into prolonged sadness. But she began each morning reading, writing her life story, and sharing lessons in local senior gatherings. Once a week, she hosted small group talks where elders shared and listened to one another, quiet, without shame. Yet each act made her feel she was living meaningfully, not because anyone asked her to, but because she chose to contribute to something larger than herself. In Stoic thought, defining life's purpose is inseparable from serving universal reason, logos. We are all part of a broader community, and our aim should include contributing to harmony and collective growth. even in the smallest of ways. The elderly no longer need to chase life, but they can still walk beside it. By embodying calm, sharing wisdom, and ensuring their words and actions reflect the clarity forged through time. Reestablishing purpose is also an opportunity to discard outdated measures of value that suggest worth is tied to youth, usefulness, or external validation. Stoicism offers a counterview. Human value lies in the ability to live rightly under any condition. Even when rejected, forgotten, or excluded from former roles, one can still define a path grounded in character and direction. No one can reverse time, but everyone can decide how to live the years that remain. And in that decision, the Stoic is not bound by circumstance. They do not let old age become the dusk of life, but rather its evening light, soft, deep, and worthy of reverence. Redefining purpose in the twilight years is not merely necessary. It is an inner journey, one that restores the sovereignty of the self after shocks, losses, or rejection. It is the final step, but no less vital, in reconnecting with life through will, wisdom, and steadiness. True to the very spirit Stoicism calls us to embrace. We don't need to be philosophers to live like Stoics. I believe that anyone, whether wounded, aging, or alone, can still choose to live with reason, compassion, and composure. If you are carrying the pain of being turned away by your children, the first thing I encourage is to stop blaming yourself. No one lives perfectly, and no one can control how others feel about them. The love, care, and sacrifice you once gave, that still holds value, regardless of whether others acknowledge it. Start with small things. Each morning, take a few minutes to write down 3 things you can control today. Whenever sorrow arises, return to your breath and remind yourself, I cannot control another's heart, but I can choose to preserve peace within mine. I too have fallen into that hollow feeling, thinking I had lost my worth when those closest to me disappeared. But in that very moment, I realized true worth is not found in relationships, but in how we respond when those relationships change. That is when I chose to forgive, to live for what is good, and to become a friend to myself each and every day. If this video resonates with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future content on Stoicism and the journey toward inner self-mastery. And no matter if the world turns away, always remember, virtue, peace, and willpower, no one can take them from you unless you surrender them yourself. I'll see you in the next video.